Hello and welcome back. Every week, we open up a book that's changed how thousands of people think, work, or live, and we pull out the one idea worth taking with you long after the video ends. Today's book is one you're going to want to sit with. So get comfortable and let's get into it. A woman sits across from a career counselor for the third time in 2 years. Same complaint, different job title. She took the marketing role because it paid well, left it because it drained her, took the freelance route because she craved freedom, left that because she craved structure. She isn't flaky. She isn't lazy. She has simply never once asked herself the one question that would have made every other decision easier. Who exactly is doing the choosing? That's the gap Peter Hollins walks straight into in The Art and Science of Self-Discovery. Not what job should you take, not what habit should you build, something underneath all of that. Because here's the uncomfortable truth Hollins opens with. Most people spend their entire lives making decisions on behalf of a person they've never actually met, themselves. Stay with me. This is the book that explains why you keep ending up in the same place by different roads, why self-ignorance is the default, not the exception. Hollins starts from a diagnosis that sounds almost too simple to be true. Without a working knowledge of who you actually are, every decision you make is a guess dressed up as a choice. You can't know what will fulfill you if you don't know what fulfillment even looks like for your particular wiring. You can't know which job, which relationship, which city will fit because fit requires a shape to fit against, and most people have never actually mapped their own shape. He compares it to a doctor diagnosing a patient blind. No competent physician treats a symptom without first understanding what's actually happening in the body. Yet most of us navigate an entire life, career, relationships, how we spend our one and only stretch of free time on this planet, without ever running the equivalent diagnostic on ourselves. We take the culture's default answers instead. Work hard, get married, buy a house, retire, checkboxes borrowed from other people's shapes, not our own. This isn't a book about becoming a different, better person. It's the opposite. Hollins' argument is that self-discovery is closer to excavation than invention. The traits, tendencies, and instincts are already there, laid down by biology and reinforced by decades of experience. The work isn't building a self from scratch. It's finally reading the one you've already got. The historical and biological roots of who you are before he hands you any modern framework. Hollins wants you to understand that the question, "Who am I?" is ancient, inscribed, quite literally, at the entrance to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Know thyself. Philosophers have chased this for millennia, but Hollins' contribution is grounding it in biology rather than leaving it in the realm of pure philosophy. Personality, he argues, isn't a costume you put on for the world. It has real structural roots, temperament traits observable in infants before culture has had any real chance to shape them, differences in how strongly a nervous system reacts to novelty, noise, or stress. Some of this is simply hardware. A baby who startles easily and cries at a stranger's face is laying down the early groundwork for what might later get labeled introversion or anxiety proneness, not because a parent did something wrong, but because that's closer to the factory setting. This matters practically, not just academically. If part of your personality is closer to bedrock than behavior, then a life built against that bedrock, forcing a highly sensitive, introspective person into a career of non-stop networking and noise, for instance, isn't a discipline problem. It's an architecture problem. You don't fix it by trying harder. You fix it by understanding what you're actually working with. Mapping yourself with ocean. Once Hollins has made the case that personality is real and measurable. He hands you the most scientifically respected tool for measuring it. The 5-factor model, better known by its acronym OCEAN. 5 broad dimensions: each one a spectrum rather than a label: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness and neuroticism, or emotional sensitivity. What makes this framework different from the popularity contest personality quizzes most people have taken is that it wasn't built by one theorist's intuition. It emerged from decades of researchers combing through the actual language people use to describe each other, then running statistical analysis to see which traits cluster together across huge populations. It isn't trying to sort you into a tidy box. It's trying to plot you honestly on 5 separate dials, none of which is inherently good or bad. High openness means curiosity, comfort with abstraction, hunger for novelty. But it can also mean restlessness, difficulty finishing what you start. Low conscientiousness means spontaneity and flexibility, but also a tendency to miss deadlines and lose the thread. High neuroticism means a nervous system that registers threat and disappointment more intensely, exhausting, yes, but also often paired with deeper empathy and sharper vigilance. Hollins' point is that every one of these dials has a cost and a gift built into the same setting. Self-discovery isn't about pushing every dial towards some imaginary ideal. It's about knowing where your dials actually sit, so you stop punishing yourself for readings that were never going to change. Beyond Ocean, MBTI, Keirsey, and the limits of boxes, Hollins doesn't stop at the 5-factor model. He walks through the most famous alternative, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the 16-letter combination test that has shown up in corporate retreats and dating profiles for decades. He's honest about its appeal. It's intuitive, it's memorable, and it gives people a vocabulary for talking about their differences that feels immediately useful. But he's equally honest about its scientific shakiness. Unlike Ocean, MBTI sorts people into either-or categories. You're either an introvert or an extrovert, a thinker or a feeler, when the actual underlying traits are continuous, not binary. Most people land closer to the middle of most of these scales than the test format allows them to admit, and test-retest reliability, meaning whether the same person gets the same result if they take it again a few weeks later, is notoriously weak. Where Hollins finds more genuine value is in the framework built on top of MBTI's categories by David Keirsey, the temperaments. Instead of 16 equally weighted boxes, Keirsey grouped personality into 4 broader temperaments built around what a person fundamentally values and needs: concrete tradition and duty, concrete spontaneity and action, abstract cooperation and meaning, or abstract logic and competence. Hollins finds this more illuminating because it moves the conversation from which letters are you to what does your nervous system actually crave: stability or novelty, people or ideas. He rounds out the historical picture with a fast tour through the theorists who shaped how we think about personality at all. The Enneagram's 9 interlocking motivations, Alfred Adler's emphasis on the drive to overcome felt inferiority, Freud's insistence that early childhood leaves permanent architecture in the adult mind, and Jung's original introvert-extrovert distinction, which every later framework, including MBTI, ultimately borrowed from. Hollins' verdict across all of them is consistent. None of these frameworks is gospel. Each is a flashlight, not a mirror. Use several, and you start to see the shape in the dark a little more clearly than any single beam could show you alone. Nature and nurture aren't opponents, one of the recurring corrections Hollins makes throughout the book. The nature versus nurture debate is, in his view, a false fight. It was never nature or nurture. It's nature expressed through nurture, filtered by nurture, sometimes amplified by nurture and sometimes suppressed by it. He uses the analogy of a seed in soil. A sunflower seed carries the instructions for what it can become, but whether it becomes a 6-foot plant or a stunted one depends heavily on the soil, the sunlight, the water it receives. Nobody would say the soil doesn't matter just because the seed contains the blueprint. And nobody should say the blueprint doesn't matter just because the soil clearly shapes the outcome. Personality works the same way. A child with a naturally cautious temperament raised by anxious, overprotective parents may develop into a deeply fearful adult. That same cautious temperament, raised by patient parents who gently push toward manageable risk, may develop into a careful, thoughtful adult who is anything but fearful. Same seed, radically different plant. The practical takeaway here is one of the gentler parts of the book. You are not simply the sum of what happened to you, and you are not simply the sum of what you were born with. You are the ongoing interaction of both, which means the story isn't finished. The soil is still, right now, something you have some say over. The practice of actually watching yourself frameworks and tests only get you so far, and Hollins is upfront that no questionnaire can substitute for the harder, slower discipline of self-observation. He describes this less as introspection in the vague. Sit and think about your feelings, sense, and more like field work, treating yourself, temporarily, as a subject worth studying with the same rigor you'd apply to studying anyone else. That means noticing patterns rather than single incidents. Not "I got annoyed at that meeting," but "I get annoyed in every meeting that runs past an hour, regardless of the topic," which tells you something about your relationship to time and structure, not just that one meeting. It means paying attention to energy, not just mood. Which activities leave you more charged afterward than before, and which ones leave you depleted even when they went well by every external measure. It means noticing your own reflexive stories, the explanations you reach for automatically when something goes wrong, because those explanations often reveal more about your self-image than about the actual event. Hollins also pushes toward external observation as a corrective, because self-perception is notoriously unreliable. People routinely rate themselves as more conscientious, more agreeable, and less biased than the people around them actually experience them to be. Asking a handful of people who know you well to describe you honestly, then looking for the patterns that repeat across multiple people rather than any single opinion, gives you a more accurate picture than a lifetime of your own internal narration ever could on its own. Can you actually change? A full walkthrough lets go back to the woman from the opening. 3 jobs, 3 exits, no diagnosis. Run her through Holland's actual framework instead of another round of guessing. First, the honest mapping. Instead of another personality quiz taken for entertainment, a genuine look at her ocean profile might reveal something like high openness paired with low extroversion, someone who craves novelty and ideas, but recharges in solitude rather than in rooms full of people. That single insight alone reframes her marketing job. It wasn't the content of the work draining her, it was the volume of forced socializing wrapped around it. The freelance stint, meanwhile, gave her solitude but stripped away the structure her moderate to high conscientiousness actually needs to feel steady, not free. Next, the nature and nurture layer. Maybe she grew up in a household that treated ambition and constant motion as the only acceptable measure of worth, nurture pushing hard against a temperament that was never built for non-stop hustle in the first place. Recognizing that doesn't excuse the pattern. It explains it, which is the necessary first step before she can actually redesign around it rather than keep repeating it. Then, the observation work. Tracking a few weeks of her actual energy, not her assumptions about her energy, might reveal that solo, deep-focused writing tasks leave her more energized at 6 p.m. than she was at 9 a.m. A clear, specific, personal data point no generic career quiz could ever have handed her. Put together, that's not vague advice to follow her passion. It's a specific, evidence-based shape. Work with real intellectual variety, low mandatory socializing, enough structure to satisfy her conscientiousness, and enough autonomy to satisfy her openness. That's a search she can actually run because for the first time, she knows what she's searching for. Now, let's be honest, every book like this deserves an honest accounting, and here it is. Hollins leans heavily on personality frameworks that vary enormously in scientific credibility, and the book doesn't always draw a bright enough line between them for a casual reader. Ocean sits on genuinely strong empirical ground. MBTI, the Enneagram, and much of classical Freudian theory sit on considerably softer ground, useful as language and as a starting point for reflection, but not something that should be treated with the same evidentiary weight as a peer-reviewed personality inventory. A reader who walks away treating their four-letter MBTI type as scientific fact has taken the book's tour of frameworks more literally than the underlying research actually supports. There's a second limitation worth nomming. Self-observation, done honestly, is genuinely hard, and the book sometimes underestimates just how much blind spots resist being seen from the inside. That's precisely why they're called blind spots. Asking friends and family for honest feedback is good advice, but it assumes you have people in your life willing to be candid with you, and assumes you're able to hear it without defensiveness distorting what you take in. Neither of those is guaranteed just because the advice was given. Even with those caveats, the book's central thesis holds up. Understanding your actual traits, rather than the traits you assume or wish you had, changes the quality of every decision built on top of that understanding. Whatever the precise reliability of any single framework, the underlying discipline, observe yourself honestly, cross-check your self-perception against outside perspective, and stop borrowing other people's blueprints for your own life, has real, durable value. The takeaway: stop guessing at who you are and start actually gathering evidence. Use a scientifically grounded tool like Ocean as your primary map, and treat looser frameworks like MBTI or the Enneagram as useful language rather than settled fact. Remember that nature and nurture were never in competition. You are the ongoing result of both, which means the story isn't finished yet. Watch yourself the way a careful researcher would watch any subject worth understanding. Patterns over single incidents, energy over mood, outside perspective over internal assumption. And once you actually know your own shape, stop trying to force it into a life built for someone else's. The woman in that counselor's office wasn't failing at 3 separate careers. She was running the same unanswered question through 3 different disguises. What she needed was never another job title. It was the diagnosis underneath all of them, and once she had it, for the first time, the choice actually became hers to make.